Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. The brain is the most complex part of the human body. This 3-pound organ is responsible for our intelligence, interpreting sensation, initiating body movement, and controlling all our behaviors. The brain and the rest of the central nervous system are composed of a variety of cells, but the primary functional unit is a cell called a neuron. All sensations, movements, memories, and feelings are the result of signals that pass through neurons of differing shapes, sizes, and functions. The average brain contains between 80 and 90 billion neurons, the cell bodies of which form gray matter. The brain is a masterpiece of God's miraculous creation, yet over time, there are many factors that impact brain development and steps that can be taken to reverse some of the factors contributing to an aging brain. Timothy Jennings, Doctor, MD, has been in private practice as a Christian psychiatrist and certified master psychopharmacologist since 1997. He's board certified in psychiatry by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, and he's a specialist in transcranial magnetic stimulation, a drug-free treatment for depression. He spent more than 2 decades researching the interface between biblical principles and modern brain science, and is a highly sought-after lecturer, international speaker, and the author of The God-Shaped Brain, The God-Shaped Heart, and the book The Aging Brain. He is in private practice in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and you can find out more about him and his ministry at Come and Reason Together. He appears here on the third Monday of every month at the 10 o'clock hour, and today our discussion is going to, in line with the theme of September being Suicide Prevention Month, is talking about the brain and its part in this concept of suicide and depression, anxiety, and hopelessness. Dr. Jennings, welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth.
Eric, thanks for having me. Always enjoy it.
The brain is this factory spewing out chemicals and hormones, enzymes, all kinds of different responses to stimuli. And in this area of your specialization, treatment of depression, anxiety, personality disorders, including suicidal thoughts. This awareness that we have in this month is because the numbers statistically of the increase in suicides has spiked. And we're seeing a particular age group which is very much impacted by this, and that is a younger age group than one might think. What's going on here?
Well, I like how you said the brain responds to environmental stimuli, because that is correct. The brain is a physical organ that is responding to our life experiences. It starts responding in utero before birth as it's being developed, and it's responding to the various signals coming to it through what mother is eating and ingesting and experiencing and mother stress levels. And then when we're born, the brain is then reacting to how the infant is being fed and treated and held or not held, and so forth. And the brain then begins making circuitry and pathways. And as we learn through life experiences, we begin developing networks, and those networks become automated for where we develop habits. And those habits are not just physical habits on how we brush our teeth, but we can have habitual responses emotionally to certain triggers or environmental stimuli because we've made pathways, or we can have habitual ways of seeing the world because we've either accepted what somebody told us, or we have reflected and looked at evidences and studied for ourselves and come to conclusions and form beliefs. But once we form those beliefs, those, unless they're challenged and questioned, those beliefs become filters through which we then process new life experiences. And so all of these things work together to actually structure or shape our brains. And then our brains do react with chemicals as you described, or it's changing its neural structure. And people can develop resilience that makes them more resilient or resistant to being demoralized, discouraged, and taken into depression, or they can develop vulnerability. And it all, of course, does start with a genetic foundation, but the genetic foundation is reacting also to environmental experiences. Our genes are turning on and turning off based on the thoughts that we think, the beliefs that we hold, the foods that we eat, the relationships we're in, the God that we worship. And so this is how God designed us, because it gives us the greatest sense of liberty and freedom. We are not locked into something called fate, or even genetic predisposition that locks us into a certain way. Our liberty and our freedom, the choices that we actually make in our lives, absolutely impact not just our neural development, but our gene expression as well. And thus, despite our foundations in our biological DNA or our early childhood, we can exercise our power of choice and change ourselves into healthier pathways. All that being said, people who struggle with higher risks of depression and or suicide are not fated to stay stuck there. There are actions we can take to help move them into a joyful, hopeful, and a non high risk suicidal life.
You mentioned genetics. Is there a genetic connection? Is there a predisposition based on family history? Is there
Yes.
inherited? If my father was a manic depressive.
Let's suicide. 50% of suicide risk is genetic. 50% of the risk is genetic, meaning we inherit from our family the DNA, which makes us at risk for suicide. But that risk is then either magnified or diminished based on environmental and life experience factors. So risk is not predetermined. It depends on what happens in our life in the aftermath of that risk. For instance, there is a gene that codes for a transporter that's like a little reuptake pump that transports a neurochemical called serotonin. Perhaps you've heard of serotonin. Yeah, there's a short arm version and a long arm version. It was initially identified that people with the short arm version had higher rates of depression than people with the long arm version, and we know that depression actually significantly increases your risk of suicide. So they identified this short arm version as a genetic risk for both depression and suicide. But then they researched a little more closely and they discovered that this short arm version does not actually confer a risk of depression or suicide. What it confers is a sensitivity to the environment. Thus, people born with the short arm version, if they have environments where there's abuse or neglect or conflict or hostility, then they have higher rates of depression and suicide later on than compared to the long arm version, who are also in abuse, neglect, or stressful environments as a child. But if people with the short arm version were raised in nurturing, loving, healthy, structured homes, they actually had lower rates of suicide and depression than those individuals with the long arm version who were also raised in loving, nurturing, supportive homes. So it just coded for sensitivity to the environment. That's one single gene. There's over 5,000 or more genes that have been identified that contribute to various mood disorders. So there is no single gene that we can actually point to say this gene will or will not. It's much more complex than that. But the data that I've just showed you should give people hope that regardless of your genetic predisposition, looking at your family history, that the choices you make in life can actually help build in resilience. And we've identified 5 variables that work together to increase suicide risk. And if you deal with those variables, you can reduce your risk.
So with I think the last number I saw was there was approximately 800,000 deaths attributed to suicide a year.
Worldwide, you mean, or in the United States? In the United States, it's about 48,000, so
Yeah,
that must be worldwide.
worldwide. Is this something that because the trajectory is increasing, that there's a way to screen?
Well, let's talk about the variables, and then you will see what's happening in society due to COVID and the government restrictions are actually increasing the risk factors. It's putting more pressure, more stress on people, and it's accelerating the identifiable risk factors that we know that can actually drive people towards suicide. And so now, a lot of people think that suicide is driven by some type of environmental stressor of some kind that hits them. They'll look at it and say, "Oh, that person just lost their job, or that person just had their house, foreclosed on, or something." But really, most of the time, those factors are a function of depression. Function of depression. And so, when people are depressed, they are more likely to socially isolate, pull back from relationships, call in sick to work, and pulling back from relationships can then result in relationship breakup and divorce because they're not as engaged. They have a relationship breakup that people say, oh, their girlfriend just broke up and that's why they commit suicide, but in fact they were depressed and weren't engaging normally. And so that led to the breakup. Or they're depressed and they're calling in sick to work, and so they get fired from their job. But people say, oh, they got fired from their job. Or they're depressed, so they're not paying their bills either because of lost work they can't afford to, or they're just not paying attention and keeping up with it, and so they lose their car, or their credit scores go down, and people point to that. But again, these things are often functions of untreated depression in people, and we know that depression is a significant risk factor for depression. In fact, it's the number one risk factor for depression, for suicide. Do we want to talk about some of the other how they constellations? Do you have a question about depression?
Well,
Because we want to also talk about interventions to help people.
right. Yeah. Let's talk about the others, and then I'll give you my questions after we've gone through the other four.
So as they look at these constellation of variables, one is a depression. Another one is people who have misreading of social cues. What I mean by social cues is that looking at people's faces or facial expressions or body language and reading them in ways that the person perceives slight, rejection, hurt, which is a dysfunction of a certain part of the brain. And they've actually looked at people at higher risk for suicide, and they have this brains that will take what would be considered neutral social cues, but interpreting them in self-punishing ways. Further, those who have increased risk of suicide demonstrate impaired response inhibition, meaning the ability to pause, think, evaluate, and make a wise choice. That's impaired, that ability. They've done a simple little test where they bring people in and they give them this option. You can have $50 right now. Here's a $50 bill right now, or you can sit over there and wait 30 minutes, and 30 minutes from now we'll give you $300. Those at high risk for suicide take the $50 right away, whereas those at low risk for suicide will wait 30 minutes. This is an impaired response inhibition, the ability to stop an impulse and wait for a better opportunity. People at high risk for suicide also have impaired learning from previous experiences. Every experience seems to be experienced in isolation, as if it's all by itself. Because, as you know, you've gone through it, I've gone through it, every human being has had problems, distresses, injuries, wounds, losses, painful events, situations that looked like they were going against us, but we worked through them. We healed the wound. We had a better outcome. It looked like it was going to be the end of the world, but it wasn't the end of the world. And we learn from those experiences that we can use those prior experiences to help us cope with the new threat or danger or problem when it comes. People at high risk for suicide aren't able to do that. Every experience is experienced in isolation, and they're not learning from past experiences. They update and go, oh, you know what? I've faced this type of stress before. It's really not that big a deal. So they make it a much bigger deal. So those are the kind of constellation of events: depression, misreading social cues, impaired response inhibition, impulsive decision making, can't wait for something better, and impaired learning from life experiences. When that constellation gets together, And then if you add in any type of substance use, alcohol, um, you know, marijuana, any substance use, that even magnifies because it increases depression, impairs judgment, makes you more impulsive, narrows down your options. So it actually magnifies these variables to put a substance on top of it. So those are the 5 things.
In each one of these areas, there are other conditions, misreading social cues. Some of those might be attributed to someone with Asperger's or somewhere on the autism spectrum, falling into some of those other categories. But if they are not in, is this exclusive of that?
No, you can have these variables. Impulsivity is a symptom of attention deficit disorder. They would be much the same way, but attention deficit disorder in and of itself does not significantly raise your suicide rates. But if you combine it with depression, you combine it with a mindset in which you have taught yourself or learned to interpret things in a self-defeating way rather than an optimistic way. Glasses always half empty. I never get anything. In other words, life is, and that's that negative reading of social cues. People become pessimistic, and so that pessimistic mindset is also highly correlated with increasing suicide risk. So let me tell you what happens to the person's mind. As these variables get together, depression is an emotional, painful place to be. It's not simply that you have no energy. That would be called fatigue. It's not simply you just can't sleep. That's insomnia. It's not simply you've lost your appetite. That's anorexia. Okay, these symptoms work together in a constellation where a person is emotionally in pain. It is an unpleasant, joyless, painful place to be when someone's in a state of depression. Okay, and so they're in a state of misery or a pain. And then when you bring these other variables in, they're pessimistic. They don't have learning from past experiences. They are impulsive. And what happens is suicide becomes an escape. Okay? They're not able to see other alternative means of getting out of their suffering or out of their pain or out of their misery. And so then suicide emerges in their mind as the ultimate escape from their misery. And you will find, in my view, when I've done this a long time, that more than 90%, maybe 99% of people who I've seen that are suicidal, they're in some form of pain. It could be depression. It could be physical pain. It could be loss of a relationship. It could be personal humiliation because they got caught in an extramarital affair and they're going to be exposed and lose their job. But they're in some type of pain and they feel trapped and they don't see any options. And they're pessimistic about the future, and suicide becomes their escape from their pain. This constellation works to make the person feel trapped in suffering, and suicide's my way out. And so one of the things that I do in my office is I identify that dynamic, and we begin working together to say, hey, if we could get you a way out where we can resolve your pain and suffering and you're still here to enjoy life, would you like that? Almost all. Rarely do I have somebody who doesn't want actually out of the suffering and continue to live.
What's most shocking to me is when we have these reports of a suicide always prefaced by unexpected, saw no indication. You have pastors, worship leaders, you have people in ministry who are active in the pulpit, and then all of a sudden, it just recently happened a week or two ago that a pastor of a megachurch took his life. And there was not any indication of a moral failure. So people were stunned by it, and the people that were close to him indicated they had no indication that something was wrong. Can you really hide all of this? I mean, that sounds like a lot of work to hide depression and rejection and hopelessness.
So we're identifying those as people have reviewed people that are high risk of suicide. What I just described to you put the, are those variables that are most consistent that put people at the highest risk of suicide. That doesn't mean they account for every suicide you ever see.
Right.
There are outliers. There are people who don't meet that criteria for a variety of reasons. There are other reasons people do commit suicide. The person who may have Alzheimer's dementia and they commit suicide before they lose their abilities because they don't want to be a burden, but they're not depressed and they don't have these other attributes. They've just assessed the realities of what their future holds, the prognosis for them, and they don't want, or the classic people who do some form of terminal life because they may be in cancer of some sort. So there's other reasons. They don't fit this either, okay? So I don't know the circumstance of the pastor that you've described, but it's not uncommon that many people will say they didn't see it up front, but as they start reflecting, oftentimes you can look back and see subtle little signs, indicators that people who are planning suicide are starting to say goodbye. They're giving small little tokens or gifts to people that they're important to them to be remembered by. They're arranging their estate or their affairs. They are divesting themselves from certain things that again, arranging. They may talk about death actually, or give clues about the afterlife, looking forward to when Jesus comes. Life is hard. I'll be glad to rest in his arms. Little comments like this could be indicators that people didn't think much of because as a Christian, we would love to be with Jesus, and so you may not pick much up on that. But other behaviors would be, maybe not for this pastor, but people who are increasing suicide before they do would be increasing use of alcohol, for instance, drinking 3 or 4 glasses of wine a night instead of 1 every 2 weeks is what they used to do. Wine with dinner for most people is not considered to be something that we get alarmed about. But if it is, he used to drink 1 glass of wine twice a week. Now he's drinking 1 glass of wine every night. Okay, that 1 glass a night, it doesn't seem like a lot, but if it's an acceleration, that could be an indicator. Sleep changes. He used to sleep 8 hours a night. Now he's sleeping 6. He's up later. He's up through the night doing things. So becoming more irritable rather than depressed, be more aggressive, more snappy. Those types of things. So there a lot of times people look back and see some of the indicators, but they were subtle indicators. And so here's another key point about suicidal issues. And it's important for all of us to remember this. Any human being who is intent without reservation on killing themselves cannot be stopped. The only ones we can help are the ones who have thoughts and intentions but are ambivalent. They are having desires, they're having feelings, they're having thoughts, they're having plans. They actually come to the point they want to, but some part of them doesn't want to. They're ambivalent. And thus that part that doesn't want to gives clues, or maybe even tells people, or acts, or has a plea for help in some way, brings attention to themselves in some way, either by behaviorally not living up to their responsibilities, they're getting depressed, crying more, whatever, or they overtly call a helpline. But a person who has no ambivalence, who has decided, like the Alzheimer's patient, it's absolutely for the best and nobody's going to stop me, well, those people can't be stopped. That makes sense to you?
It does. It does. So at what point can family, friends impact inventory, notice changes, open up dialogue, encourage counseling?
Okay, so good. So protective factors then. People who have resilience, and that would be people who have built within themselves coping strategies through life, etc., life experiences where they've been able to work through and learn from, people have a hopeful mindset, people who exercise regularly, people have a healthy lifestyle, people have a belief in God. All of these things actually give resilience. So building in resilience through life is, but other things, social connection, having connection. And that doesn't mean having simple interaction. We have interaction when we go to the Walmart or to the store. Interaction is not connection. Connection is having people that you actually care about, are interested in, know, familiar with, and they care about, know, and are familiar with you. People that if your car broke down, you would have no trouble picking the phone up and calling them to give you a ride. Or would feel comfortable calling you for a ride in that circumstance, etc. So family, social networking, and this is where the proverbial church family is so healthy, because many of us who've grown up in church have or have had church family. We have our biologic family, but we have real friends, real connections, people that care about us, that know us, that we hang out with. We go to I don't know if you ever had a church that had something called potluck, okay? You know, the after service meal that people bring food and we fellowship together and we build relationship with. Those things are hugely important for reducing both depression and suicide risk, because we have connection with people who can identify us when we get a little off first, intervene before it ever gets bad. But when it does get bad, people that would be there for us and we can connect and reach out to help us. So also receiving mental health care if we have a diagnosable actual disorder like depression, that we aren't embarrassed or shamed or believe that if I just had more faith I wouldn't have this physical condition called depression. I will just muddle on through on my own. No, if we get actual professional mental health care for real mental health condition, markedly is protective for suicide behavior in the future. Bringing this together, though, we see that the current COVID restrictions actually reduce protection because it isolates people, diminishes those supports. We don't meet together. We don't have that potluck anymore. We don't have that networking. We don't feel, and then over time we feel more isolated. Our fears go up. Our love that calms us goes down because we're not actually able to minister to others. And as we minister to others, that actually reduces our risk of depression and suicidal thoughts, but we're not able to because we're restricted by our government now. And then when we go out in public, we have to wear masks, so we feel more fearful and more isolated. So there's a lot of variables here that are contributing, and maybe we can talk about some more on the other side, the financial and other hardships that are coming into bear, and then other interventions we can make to bring protection.
So clearly, stimuli releases brain chemistry. So negative stimuli, does that cause a different set of brain chemistry to be released?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Worry, trauma, early childhood traumas, conflicts in relationships, conflicts with your employer, arguments and fights. This releases, activates your stress circuitry, causes your immune system to kick on, kicks up adrenaline, kicks up negative stress, eventually works on the brain to alter gene expression. And multiple studies show increases your risk of depression, neurobiological changes in brain structure, circuitry activation, increases ruminating negative loops, and contributes to some of these problems that can then increase your risk of suicide.
We're talking with Dr. Timothy Jennings, author of The God-Shaped Heart, The God-Shaped Brain, and The Aging Brain, Proven Steps to Prevent Dementia and Sharpen Your Mind. We're talking in this Suicide Prevention Month about suicide, contributing factors, why even people of faith are committing suicide, what some of the social restrictions, the negative fallout from this terribly named social distancing as opposed to physical distancing has isolated many people and exacerbated their perception of the problems in their life, giving them the driving them to depression, which is the gateway to suicide. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the other factors involved in understanding and then helping take a biblical approach and a message of hope into every life, whether we know whether the person's struggling or not. That's not the prerequisite for sharing the good news, nor the prerequisite for sharing a message of hope is only to people that you can identify. It is to all, and that's why it's to go to all the world with this message, because you don't know exactly who needs it in this moment. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, host of Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Revealing Prophecy, seen every week on the Igniting Nation Broadcasting Network. Our daily on-demand programming is available on our Apple and Android apps and on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Android TV. We broadcast live Monday through Friday through our apps, on our website, ignitingnation.com, and on Facebook Live. You can listen daily on our audio platforms on Spotify, iTunes, TuneIn, and iHeart. Our lineup of best-selling authors bring you the most in-depth biblical insights into the most pressing issues of our time, including prophecy, Israel, spiritual warfare, and a wide variety of contemporary Christian issues impacting the body of Messiah around the globe. If you missed the live show, you can always catch up on the Igniting Nation YouTube channel. Follow us on social media and join us as we endeavor to heal the nations with the Word of God.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to study right by my side through the Biblical Truth Library. Imagine having access to over 1,000 hours of audio and video teachings available to you through our website on a subscription basis or via our Apple and Android apps on an a la carte basis. Whichever method you choose, we promise to deliver new insights into the living Word of God as seen through the eyes of a Jewish believer. If you hunger and thirst like millions around the world for a deeper walk with God and the revelation of new understanding of the Scriptures, visit ignitingnation.com and click on the Biblical Truth Library or on any device with our free app. Don't let another day go by without receiving your heart's desire for a new depth of understanding into all of God's Word.
Igniting a Nation is expanding across the globe and healing the nations with the Word of God. As we expand our television ministry, we have added new Apple and Android apps, along with new streaming platforms including Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio. Your support keeps us broadcasting live interviews and teachings to cover every challenge facing a believer in these perilous yet prophetic times. In appreciation for your support, we are offering you a special gift. For any donation of $100 or more, we will send you a signed copy of Rabbi Eric Walker's best-selling biblical thriller, The Codist, and The 7 Laws of Abundant Living. You can give online via ignitinganation.com or by check mailed to Igniting a Nation, 115 Brook Highland Cove, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. Make sure to claim your special offer, IAN 2020. Help us keep reaching the uttermost corners of the earth with the good news of Messiah.
Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Dr. Timothy Jennings, as we do on the third Thursday of every month at the 10 o'clock a.m. Central Time hour. He's the author of The God-Shaped Heart, The God-Shaped Brain, and The Aging Brain, Proven Steps to Prevent Dementia and Sharpen Your Mind. Tim, welcome back to your edition of Revealing the Truth.
Eric, thanks for having me.
Tim, we're talking about suicide. Depression being the gateway, that's really the launch pad, the springboard to taking the next step in acting on trying to stop the pain, stop the hopelessness. The only way out that they see is out, not engaging in logical, reasonable solutions or plans for change, but they're gotten to themselves to the point where they are in a state of hopelessness where this is the only way out for them.
Mm-hmm.
If we know people that are struggling with this COVID financially, they're struggling physically, they're struggling emotionally. We see the family dynamic, or we don't see the family dynamic because we can't visit with the family, but we talk to one or the other and we hear of trouble. Are there things we can do? I mean, recommending somebody to go into counseling is not usually very well received.
Right, and so there are things that we can do societally, and then things we can do directly interacting with the person. Interacting or being around someone we're concerned with, that we have, like maybe our own family member, that we have access to be able to get in their home. If we do, I as a doctor can't go in the home, but husband, wife, son, daughter, those types of things. Removing the means. If somebody if they have suicidal risk and they have a gun in the home, the gun needs to be taken out as long as they're at suicidal risk. If they have lethal pills available to them, they need to be diminished or removed until the issue is resolved. That doesn't mean they can't have their gun back. Of course they can, once the suicidal risk is over. But removing means has been demonstrated over and over again to reduce the actual death rate from suicide. It saves lives. But another big one: professional medical treatment for depression. Not homeopathic treatment. Professional medical treatment for depression reduces suicide, over and over again proven. School education on educating about risks and normalizing to getting help if one is depressed, and doing away with stigmatization of that can also reduce societal risk in society, because people don't have that fear of getting the help. Limiting media exposure or coverage to suicides, especially adolescents, and if you give a lot of coverage, a lot of the insecure, seeking fame type thing, no attention, loneliness, isolated, and we know that there are copy suicides if there's a lot of attention given. Alcohol and substance use treatment programs and plans, and this is a variable again during the COVID. During COVID, a lot of the 12-step meetings are not meeting, and there's been a huge relapse or a resurgence in substance use among vulnerable populations, which is contributing both to worsening depression, more family domestic violence, which also increases risk, and more substance use and more suicide. So this restriction, looking at one narrow variable, let's stop transmission of a virus, but don't consider any other variables on human health and happiness, is causing a lot of suffering in our society right now. Those are things that can be done. But other things, the big thing that you want to do if you have somebody who has a known recurrent risk, like they have a history of depression or history of bipolar disorder, okay, is help them develop what we call in the profession a safety plan. A safety plan, and that would be that they learn to identify their own warning signs of worsening mood or intrusive or creeping in suicidal feelings, that they identify the warning signs. They develop with their therapist, with their psychiatrist, or psychologist, they develop coping strategies internal to themselves. Oh, when this comes, and one of the simple ones I do with my patients that many of them find beneficial is what we talked about earlier. They feel trapped, and suicide becomes the escape, that we reframe that for them, and they recognize when they get suicidal thoughts, they go, no, I don't want to die, I want to escape my pain. and they reframe it as, I want a way out. I'll call Dr. Jennings, and we will work on getting out of this depression. I want out of it. I don't want to stay here stuck. Okay, and that's a great internal coping strategy, but there are others depending on the person's unique circumstance. Other things that go into a safety plan would be family or friends, or that they can call and get help in a time of crisis. Additionally, in their safety plan would be their medical professional agencies, their doctor, their counselor, and also suicide hotlines. Methods to reduce a potential risk are removed, that they put that part of their safety plans. And they also put in their safety plan a review of all the things that they have to live for. That's in that plan, that they review that and say, here's all the reasons, my children and this and that and so forth, that they have reasons to live. And that's part of their safety. Developing a safety plan. And there's actually, I believe, free apps available that you can type in My Safety Plan and find some apps that people can put this on their phone. They can go right there, oh, My Safety Plan, and they start going through it.
You are a psychiatrist, medical doctor, and a psychopharmacologist, prescriber of medication.
Yes.
Then you have the field of clinical psychologist, therapist. Where does one hand off? Who do I go to for what?
So if it's major depression and it's severe, and it's typically considered severe if there's suicidal thoughts involved. If it's there can be mild to moderate depression, and people tend to not get to the point where they want to end their life, but they may have functional impairment. But if it's severe, then the data shows best outcomes occur when medical intervention occurs. And medical intervention is some form of physical intervention, something happening to your body, in addition often to a counselor or therapist. Counselor or therapist alone does not give the best outcome, and many times medications or physical interventions alone do not give best outcomes. Physical interventions can be medication, or there is something called transcranial magnetic stimulation, where you give pulses of magnetic energy right to the brain in a doctor office in an outpatient setting, and people are awake and alert. Or something that's still very effective and can turn suicidal stuff around within 24, 48 hours very quickly is the old ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, where you have electrical current, not magnetic pulses, put into the brain that fire the neurons. Very effective in treating, but some form, the most common form, of course, is medication. And medication under the supervision of a psychiatrist with perhaps a psychotherapist working with them gives very good outcomes for many patients, but some patients will still be treatment non-responsive or treatment resistant, and they need to be worked with. I would tell people we have many treatments, including now ketamine nasal spray, which is known to be extremely effective, as well as the TMS and other things. So I would tell people, be very hopeful. There are treatments out there. For the vast majority, I haven't had patients really in my practice we haven't been able to improve from their depression. So lots of variables. But other things, why it's happening, you say it's picking up more. In addition to the COVID restrictions in our society, historically, what has helped people have resilience is when they have a sense of meaning or value or purpose in their life. So people can suffer, and it's well known, they can suffer and tolerate pain longer if it's for a purpose, if it's for a cause. I'm doing this for my child. I'm doing this in military settings to get the message back to my troops, to my people in my company, to save lives. And so they suffer and put up with hardship in order because there's a purpose. When we have meaning, when we have value, we have purpose, that actually gives resilience and allows people to fight through those painful times in life to find better times in life. Well, what gives meaning, value, and purpose historically, the big three have been God, family, country. Those are the big three existential things that people find meaning, value, and purpose in. I live to serve God and bring glory to His name. I live to serve my family and support and protect them. I live for my country. to be, as John F. Kennedy say, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I'm going to make my community better. I'm going to make my world better. A higher purpose. But the messaging in modern society in America today, there is no God. Only a delusional, closed-minded, unscientific, primitive human being would believe in God. And families are fractured and broken, and the country is abusive, slave promoting, racist, and you can't. There's not a country you shouldn't support. You shouldn't even stand for the flag. It's a horrible country. And so what's happened is that if you take those away, the only thing left is self. So I only live for me. It's all about me, what I can get, and who's going to promote me, and who's going to protect. And then what happens when we turn to self neurobiologically, we actually become more frightened. We become more fearful. Our fear circuits begin to go. We become more, and that drives depression. We become more insecure, more isolated. We trust less. We have less healthy relationships. When we love others as God has designed us, we love God first, and then we love our families and we love our neighbors, which would represent in our country. Okay. Then we develop higher cortical circuits, our anterior cingulate cortex. We calm our fear circuits. We have greater resilience. We have less depression. And so understand very clearly, there's a messaging in this country that, in my view, is not just harmful, it's evil. It is anti-God. It is anti-love. It is anti-family. It is anti-community, all under the umbrella of community injustice. It's a huge lie. It's a huge fraud. It's destructive.
The social anxieties that have been exacerbated by this social distancing, I'm actually seeing people who are exhibiting now social anxiety, fear of re-entry into society, that they now have everything delivered to them. They don't leave their home for any reason, and
I'm wondering if this is my view as a product of what some people are terming panic porn. And panic porn is this media that is constantly pumping a panic, desperation message out there. For instance, the way they report the news, you'll find in a community. Local high school had 11 students test positive for COVID. School is shut down for deep cleaning. Right? That's how it's reported. But they don't report this. But my question, so what? So what they had 11 students test positive? Did any of them have any, are they sick? Did they go to the hospital? Did they die? Well, no, they don't report. 11 students tested positive. They went home and they had very mild symptoms and they're all well and nobody really had a bad outcome. They don't report it. They leave it out because they don't want people to actually realize that 99.8% of people who get this infection recover. Over 99% of people do very, very well. They don't want people to know that. They want people to live in panic and fear, because when you're fearful, then you surrender liberty. When you're fearful, you stop ministering. You focus. Fear causes us to be self-referenced. As soon as Adam and Eve sinned, they ran and hid because they were afraid. And Adam immediately was no longer concerned with Eve. He was concerned with himself. And he said, it wasn't me, it was the woman. Take her and punish her. Don't deal with me. And it's all self-reference. Perfect love casts out fear. And as we have love come back into our heart, we stop acting in fear. And greater love is no man that he give his life for a friend. Christ did not think equality with the Father something to be grasped, but humbled himself in the form of a servant. And so love seeks to serve and build up. It doesn't seek to protect self, it sacrifices self. And so it says in Revelation 12:11, those ready for Christ's return, these are they who do not love their life so much as to shrink from death. They're not self-focused all the time. Oh, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. Oh, me, me, me. And that's what the messaging of the modern media is doing. It's inciting the fear, self-centered survival drives, and it's obstructing church attendance where we get fed the gospel message and the bread of life, so that we can, the bread of life is the principles of truth and love coming from God that help temper and remove the fear drives from our hearts. And so, yes, you're seeing this because it's the predictable consequence when we let go of God's principles, embrace the principles of the world.
This country has been marketing evil It's an industry. The movies, the Halloween, the core values of BLM are satanic.
Godless evolutionism.
Godless evolutionism taught in our schools. It is orchestrated, and I can see people becoming desperate because it's as if we've gone from this very, very bright light, but it's on a dimmer switch, and somebody is slowly dimming the light, and life is becoming darker, and it's being peddled as darker, and the future is being darker. And for older people like myself, playing in the idea, oh, Social Security is going to run out, you're going to be destitute. The financial companies, you don't have enough saved to live out your life. What are you going to do if you wind up with a catastrophic illness and need the care? It's going to devastate your family. I hear all this messaging, and I'm in an age group that's being targeted.
So for the spiritually discerning person, the Bible says at the end of time that Satan goes around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Now, think that description. When a lion roars, what's the purpose of its roar? It is to incite fear. That's why it roars, to make its prey afraid so it freezes. Okay? That's why it roars. Now, I'm asking your audience, our audience, when you hear all this messaging that is making a message of fear, 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 do you hear the roar of our enemy Satan? Because if you don't, your discerning Bible eyes are not on. Ask for the eye salve of the Holy Spirit. This is not the message of Jesus Christ.
It is not. It is not. And that's exactly been the message we've been giving here for this whole process. Is it's a time for discernment, that being sequestered in your home, God gave you a set of instructions. Jesus said it was the beginning. He started the greatest commandment was love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with Deuteronomy 6:5. But to the hearer, they don't stop there at the end of that. They finish that. And you shall talk about him when you rise up and when you lie down and when you walk along the way. You should teach them to your children. This was the rest of, he started the message by giving you the top line, but to the Jewish mind, you finish it. That's how we teach Scripture. Is I start the verses and you finish. You fill in the blanks. His audience knew to fill in the blanks, and God sent us back home and said, "Look, get out of your mega churches. Mom and Dad, teach your kids. Tell them about me. This is an opportunity." And it's a wonderful opportunity to reconnect as a family. We're seeing, unfortunately, divorce rates go up, and people talking about separation going up in this tight quarters because they haven't mapped out a safe plan for their family and for their life. Maybe we should look at some of the tools that are involved in suicide prevention that are life-giving and apply them before we ever get on the path to depression, and use them as valuable learning and positive reinforcement so that we never get to that point of losing control and substance abuse and not being able to be socially receptive and not be entertainers of depression, but be messengers of hope as we've been called to be. So there's a flip side to this, and the flip side of this, the other side of this suicide coin is the same principles apply to living healthily. The same principles that will navigate you out of this suicidal path by giving you your hope and giving you your exit strategy, not out of this life, but to get out of your problem, your trouble, to find the hidden passageway. It's going to be the gate that and the path that Jesus is waiting for you right there to meet you in that time, and this is the time and the season for that message. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I thank you, Dr. Timothy Jennings. You can find out more about him at comeandreason.com, and a better understanding, maybe a healthy understanding of suicide and some of the contributing factors, what we can do, what we can't do, what we can expect, what we should look for, and how we should first take our own inventory as to where we are before we start looking at other people in our life, but to listen a little bit more carefully, care a little bit more deeply, and be a messenger of hope, even in the darkest hour. Dr. Timothy Jennings, we look forward to seeing you next month, as we always do at this time. God bless you, my friend.
Bless you, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.